I'm an alienist. That is a doctor. But instead of looking to cure a disease of the body, I look to help those who are suffering from an illness of the mind. Sometimes society looks upon people as crazy. It may only mean that they're alienated from their own true natures. A toast to the beginning of a fruitful partnership.
Let me introduce you to Dr. Laszlo Chrysler.
I've read your work. I found it fascinating. Most of it.
It's something new. Forensic science married with human psychology. I find the bones to be the most reliable witness, while my brother's more a man of the flesh. He means the soft tissues.
What if it's true? One man committed both murders.
You run along home now, society, why? Our task is to construct an image of the man, his habits, his appetites, and thereby capture him.
Gentlemen, you have made yourself a wide variety of very powerful enemies.
He's here. He's real.
He's no longer hiding his victims. He evolved.
Evolved to what? Evolved to what?
I must follow this wherever it goes.
They say misery loves company. They haven't met author Caleb Carr.
The name of this place is called Misery Mountain.
Yes.
You're not rolling your eyes at me, are you?
No, I'm not rolling my eyes at you. It's just that it is an amazing coincidence that I bought a mountain called Misery Mountain.
To Carr, misery's more than a state of mind. It's a living.
Am I miserable? No, wouldn't describe myself as a miserable person, but there are those who would say that my outlook on humanity is pretty miserable.
Carr has a gift for turning the worst humanity has to offer into best-selling books. It started with 1994's The Alienist, a graphic tale about a serial killer loose in 19th century New York City, in a neighborhood that Carr writes knew little of laws, man-made or otherwise. Its sequel, The Angel of Darkness, was a bestseller too.
It was just supposed to be a little cottage industry that would give me a stipend to live off of while I was doing the work that I had always done and was trained to do. It takes off, is a big bestseller.
His latest work is The Italian Secretary, a Sherlock Holmes novel commissioned by the estate of Holmes' creator, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
How difficult was it to write in someone else's style?
Not difficult for me, not with Conan Doyle.
Carr had read Sherlock Holmes since he was a kid and watched the Holmes movies, like The Hound of the Baskervilles.
Who is it? A Notting Hill murderer. He escaped from prison last month.
I could speak like Basil Rathbone being Sherlock Holmes by the time I was 10.
But Carr's true calling is military history, and it was the historian in him that took over when he designed his house after buying all 1,400 acres of Misery Mountain.
There is me in every detail of this house.
Every detail.
There's not a bit of this house that wasn't carefully considered by me.
Carr sketched the house himself, no architect needed, and spent 2 painstaking years making it come to life.
And it is an interesting comparison between writing a book and building a house. They're very similar.
I would have never thought that.
Well, I wouldn't have either. And if I had thought it, I probably wouldn't have done it because writing a book is a really torturous process. And it turned out that building a house was not as easy as I thought it was going to be.
It's modeled after a 200-year-old English stone manor.
Well, the impression was definitely to have an old-style great room.
And as anyone who's read Carr's work knows, the beauty is in the details.
I wanted the effect of the depth of the windows and doors being like this, because else you don't get that howling wind that comes in and out of those stone apertures. That's so necessary part of having a stone house.
Having a stone house.
The study where Carr writes is tucked away in a second-floor corner at the top of an 1840s replica wrought iron spiral staircase.
And is there something to this being a little bit more difficult to navigate than your typical staircase?
Well, it isn't. It doesn't make it any easier for people to get up here, which is a good thing, because I don't really want people to get up here.
You could say the same thing about all of Misery Mountain. This place has in fact been an escape for Carr his whole life. The White House down the road has been in the Carr family for several generations. For him and his brothers, the outdoors was a refuge.
If we hadn't had this place, I don't think we would have really survived.
Carr grew up on New York's Lower East Side, a then crime-filled neighborhood where violence was a part of everyday life. If you want to know why violence pervades Carr's work, look here and look to his father.
My father was a violent person by nature. He was a tempestuous person.
When Carr's father, Lucian, was 19 years old, he killed a man and served 2 years in prison before being pardoned.
He never spoke about it. And it gave me more of a desire to try to figure out where personal violence comes from.
But Lucian Carr also had a creative side as an editor at United Press International and as a good friend to some of the biggest names of the Beat generation, Jack Kerouac, William S. Burroughs, and Allen Ginsberg. However, to young Caleb, they held little interest.
And you know there are fans of beat writers out there who say, you had Burroughs and Ginsberg in your living room, and you walked away from it?
Yes, I have been haunted by those people all my life, and I did walk away from it. The tanks are German.
Instead, Carr buried himself in military history. On a shelf at his new home are the toy soldiers he painted as a kid. He's a contributing editor to the Quarterly Journal of Military History.
Insurgent forces, get up next to the blackboard. Counterinsurgent, get on this side of the board.
And he shares his passion with the next generation, teaching at Bard College outside New York City.
Remember what your goal is. Remember what they have to establish.
When we visited, he was leading students through an Iraq war game. The topic, insurgencies and counterinsurgencies.
They have to come in through the south and they have to go for Baghdad.
Right.
They have. If they don't do that, it's suicidal. I mean, it'd be great for you.
A few years ago, Carr published The Lessons of Terror. He traced 2,000 years of war, arguing that strategies that target civilians have always ultimately failed.
What I am trying to do is to influence the way American power is exerted around the world. We must develop a way for American military power to be projected in a more enlightened fashion. We have to, or the entire world, even more of the world than hates us now, will hate us later.
And if historian, novelist, and architect aren't enough, Carr has written the words to an opera in progress. The subject is Merlin, the magician in the legends of King Arthur. A story of noble intentions and corruption. A little history with your music.
Traditional styles are very comforting to me. The modern world is a very uncomfortable place for me.
Why is the modern world uncomfortable for you?
It's hard to look at the modern world as a student of the things that I study and see it as anything but pretty horrendous. It's not a comfortable place in terms of where our values are going. We are heading into a very dark age.
How old are the calves?
About 2 weeks.
Still, even in the world of Caleb Carr, there are bright spots.
Mabel.
You did name them.
Oh yeah, they've all got names. And they know their names too, which is the great thing.
Carr shares his mountain with a herd of Herefords. They're raised for beef, and Carr's been warned not to get too attached.
Gina was the original, all the way up in the corner there.
But he's named each one, including a runt called Frankie.
He's the smartass of the herd. He's the little guy that nobody expected to live. They all tried to push him around when he was little. Now he goes around just knocking into everybody.
So you have some identification with this cow?
Well, yes, I would say I do have some identification with Frankie.
But will he ever have more than the cows and his cat Suki for company?
I've had a lot of girlfriends who came up here and just couldn't, this is not the beach. You need to want to be in the country to spend time up here.
So for now, Caleb Carr is putting his faith in his work.
The counterinsurgents played this very smart.
And in his students, who are studying the past in hopes of changing the future.
They're all interested in it. The good ones, the smart ones, are all interested in it. It's actually a very reassuring thing that they are.
So maybe it's not all gloom and doom then, Caleb.
It's not all gloom and doom, no. There are things to be encouraged by.
Maybe we'll pull out of the dark ages. You can come down from Misery Mountain.
Absolutely. There's always a chance that that's going to happen. But it's long odds. But I'd been playing already with the idea of, and this is what sort of just kicked me into high gear, I'd been already playing with the idea of the duality of a psychiatrist coming from a similarly violent background to a serial killer and a killer himself. Why does one go one way and one go the other? And that was the theme that would eventually become the book, but people often mistakenly think that I set out to write a fiction book about 1890s New York. That's not true. Once I had the plot, once I had the characters, then I went shopping for a time period. And what I did was I just kept going back and going back and going back to the earliest point where people could be reasonably, credibly believed to be speaking in these terms about a murderer. And that happened to be the 1890s. And then it was a perfect time period because of a lot of coincidences. You always start writing a mystery from the end. The thing you have in mind is the solution, and you work backwards from there. That was the goal. That is the goal. Agatha Christie didn't come up with that idea. That goes all the way back to Dickens and Wilkie Collins and Edgar Allan Poe. But she did sort of elaborate it very clearly and very nicely. That's a tough one because you can get suckered on that one. You can think, okay, I've got enough to start. I don't know exactly how it ends, but I've got enough to start. And the next thing you know, you're going to find yourself lost. And because of the second thing, which is what matters in a great mystery. Is it a great detective that matters in a great mystery? Yes. But even more crucial, as Alfred Hitchcock said, every good story is only as good as the villain. And if you don't have a great villain, then you're never going to have a great sleuth. So it's to remember those kind of parallel tracks, because we see this all the time, when the inevitable scene of the sleuth and the villain facing off comes, and in the cheaper versions of it, you get some speech about how in another lifetime we could have been friends and all that crap. Which sometimes isn't crap. Sometimes it's well done. It's better done in things like science fiction, but it's not. It's rarely done very well in mystery fiction. But there is a real importance to that idea of the duality. You've got to have both those characters. You can't start out with just a great detective and think that you're going to get where you're going. That's something I think that Agatha Christie didn't necessarily serve, because everybody got so fixated on the quirkiness of her detectives that they lost a lot of sight of the fact that in her greatest mysteries there are great villains. And certainly in the greatest Sherlock Holmes stories, obviously, Sherlock Holmes would have never existed without Professor Moriarty. And really, in my lousy opinion, my 2 cents, that's why Sherlock Holmes, that's why they should have left him alone. And when Sherlock Holmes went over the Reichenbach Falls with Professor Moriarty, they should have let Conan Doyle kill them both off at that moment. That would have been the absolute perfect ending. So, okay, you've got all of those elements. You've got all of these rules to play by. What's going to matter after that? Structure. There is possibly no writing form that is more disciplined, that should be more disciplined, I should say, because there's an awful lot that isn't, that should be as disciplined as mysteries. And the terrible paradox of it is you start out in mysteries creating an incredible structure that you're so impressed with. It became sort of a famous story at the time the book was published. My entire living room in my little apartment, 3 walls, were covered with index cards, planning out the entire story. And then I created all these characters who proceeded to be good enough characters that they defied probably 70% of that structure. And at first I was trying very hard to make them go back and do what they were supposed to do. And the answer was, of course, a big fuck you, we're gonna do what we wanna do. And they did. But that's an important realization, because sometimes you're gonna think you're failing if that happens. You're not failing. That's actually a sign that you're succeeding. Because that's the final piece I would give you, is that yes, you have to plan it out, even knowing that probably most of your plan is going to be defied by your characters if your characters are any good. Because if your characters are any good, let's say you've got a sleuth, you've put a lot of yourself into him, but following this idea of universalization of it's not interesting just because it happened to me. You put in a lot of stuff that's maybe inspired by things you went through, that is maybe dramatized forms of things you went through. So you've got a good sleuth, you've got friends of his, you've got a good team to go with them, and they will defy you, and they should defy you if they're good characters. If you can move them around like pieces on a chessboard, well, that's probably as interesting as your book will be. It's a sign that you're really succeeding if your characters don't do what you want them to do. Now, how does that match up against the fact that you're working backwards from the beginning? I mean, from the ending. Well, that's when they do have to fall in line by the ending. You know where they have to get to and what they have to do for the last chunk of the book. But you have to take them out of almost everything in the middle and then get them back again. And then, if all works out, you're golden. So that's all you have to do. And that's all I have to tell you. Beyond that, it's just up to you. I'm happy to ask any questions about that process that you would like to ask, but I don't like to make it sound glib and simplistic. It's as hard as hell. And really, for me, with The Alienist, it came with the curious set of coincidences in the 1890s. It wasn't just that it was plausible for it to happen in the 1890s, but there was the fact that Theodore Roosevelt, who I had studied my whole life and written about my whole life, he was police commissioner in 1896. There was the fact that if I had people his age involved in the story, they could have all been at Harvard together taking classes under William James. So the first psychological laboratory in the United States. It all, once those coincidences start to roll, that's what makes you say, aha, now I have it. If you don't get those, you'll never be able to force them. You'll never be able to make up anything that doesn't work. It's the big aha moments, but really, you have to be able to be honest with yourself.
I fail to see a way he might have gotten up here. Or down, for that matter.
The Zweig children. They were found in a water tank. Up on a roof.
That's what Kreisler said.
And Aaron Morton, the paper stated his body was hidden on the Brooklyn Bridge. Heights. He's attracted to heights. A rooftop water tank, 2 bridges, and now...
Yes, that's good. What else do the details of the crime suggest to you?
Might water play a role as well?
Yes. Water seems important. Perhaps a view of water.
The Zweigs were hidden. The Morton boy, too. These last 2, however, were left in plain sight.
He's no longer hiding his victims. He's moved on. He evolved.
Evolved to what?